Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and welcome back to another player review as we take a look of every single person that moves clubs via free agency or via the trade mechanism during the off-season this AFL period of 2023. And I'll tell you what I think it means for the club that every single player has left, the club they've now arrived at, and wrap it up for you from an AFL Fantasy SuperCoach and Dream Team perspective to tell you what I think it means for us as the fantasy footy community in 2024 and beyond. Talking about Tom Fullarton, he has sought and found a trade from the Brisbane Lions all the way to the Melbourne Football Club. What does it mean for the Brisbane Lions? Politely, not a whole heap. He's been on the list for a handful of years now, played just the 15 games. I think 9 was the best seasonal career he had, and that's going back a couple of years ago. He's well and truly been a depth player at Brisbane. He's not a pure key forward. He's also not a pure key ruckman. He's very much a hybrid player, and that's probably the attraction from a Melbourne Football Club perspective. But we remember just how prolific and dominant these tools are that the Brisbane Lions have. The recruitment of free agent Joe Danaher just a handful of years ago, Eric Hipwood, and then Oscar McInerney. These three have really owned the key position forward and ruck spaces for Brisbane, and there's just not been that opportunity for Tom to be able to crack into the best 22. He's very much been a VFL player at the Lions for a number of years now, and it's required several injuries or suspensions for him to get opportunities. I've forgotten Darcy Fort, who's well ahead of him in the pecking order in all of those spots as well. So Fullarton's moving to Melbourne to get a little bit higher up in the pecking order and hopefully get himself further opportunities. But will Brisbane miss Tom? From what I hear, he's a fantastic clubman, but in terms of what they're going to be about as a premiership aspiring side in 2024, I think Brisbane are okay and will happily allow Tom to move clubs, which they have done so. From a Melbourne Football Club perspective, the departure of Fullarton from Brisbane into their football club is kind of helping fill a little bit of a gap that has been there with Brodie Grundy now as a Sydney Swan. Like I said, Fullarton's not a pure ruck. He's also not a pure forward. When I look at what Melbourne are doing in the key position places, we know Gawn is far and above the number one ruck choice for them, and understandable too. What they do with those key position forwards outside of Van Rooyen is anyone's guess. Tom McDonald, Ben Brown. These are guys that at times have floated in and out. I know they love what Jefferson is showing him in the VFL, but he's still a number of years away from really establishing himself. And then they don't really have much in the depth of the ruck stops. I know McDonald's played that relief pinch ruck and even at times has done full matches over his AFL career in the ruck. So I think all Fullarton is doing is just adding to these key position stocks. Like I've said, he's handy enough in the ruck. He's handy enough in the forward. He's not a threat dominating, puts fear in the opposition by any means in these spaces. But there's someone on the list that's a warm body that can cover depth of injuries and suspensions and still has some upside. I think it's a reasonable pickup from Melbourne. He definitely jumps ahead of the queue a little bit from what he's been in at Brisbane. So I think Melbourne and Tom will be really happy with this move. What does it mean for us from a fantasy footy perspective? Well, not a lot. He's never averaged over 40 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, and he's got a couple of years in the mid-40s in SuperCoach. Like I said earlier at the top of this episode, just the 15 AFL games, and a lot of them has been a bits and parts player of either ruck or forward, and never really shown that he's got fantasy pedigree about him. Even at the VFL level, he's done okay, but never really dazzled us in such a way that we had to mark him as a black booker or put him as a handcuff option. So for me, I think Tom Fullarton will be cheap, undoubtedly, but barring a drastic drop away of significant injuries to Melbourne, I'm not so sure he's anywhere near the best 22 just yet. I know that forward line needs some tools, but Van Rooyen is the obvious ruck forward. And then if they can kind of find their way through with a couple of others, Shane McAdam will make his way to the club. At time of releasing this episode, he's not there yet, but he will make his way there. He adds a dynamic to their forward line. Chandler, Pickett, Petrarca when he's down there, and Van Rooyen. That's a really damaging forward group. So I think whoever takes those tall roles It's got to be Fullarton in the best 22, and I think he's an insurance policy only, which means for us in the fantasy community, barring 3 or 4 variables going drastically against Melbourne's key positions and ruck stocks, I don't expect to see too much of Tom Fullarton in the blue and red in 2024. But do you agree or do you disagree on my take on Tom Fullarton? You can comment below and let me know what you think. Is he a fantasy gun in the waiting? You think I've misread it, or do you think he's not even going to get a chance of games? You can have your say in the comments section below. Every single player that moves clubs this offseason, I'll be reviewing them. If you haven't checked those out yet, make sure you click on the playlist link. It's got all the details and every episode of every player released so far that we have done a review on. And as a player moves clubs, we will drop another video for you about them. Thank you for watching. Thank you to our Patreons who have subscribed. If you would want to become a Patreon, you can join that with the link in the description below. If not, you can definitely like and follow, subscribe to this channel as well. And we can't wait to chat with you about another player that's moved clubs this off season.